Welcome to the second episode of DePaul Art Time Capsule. I'm Taylor Fleming. This episode is all about one of my favorite forms of art, theater. The new creative school at DePaul, which officially opens in fall 2024, will change the art scene here, which includes theater. To represent theater students, we have Cole Stephen. He has acted in Romeo and Juliet at Bridgerton, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and after this interview was recorded, he was cast as the baker for the upcoming production of Into the Woods. In addition to these roles, he is active in Do's or Do Theater Honor Society, having served on the exec board and participated in events like Insomniac Theater. Here's my interview with Cole. To get started, can you give me the rundown of some of your favorite roles that you've played in DePaul Theater?
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite, I'll split it between musicals and plays because those were always separate to me growing up. Favorite musical role has to be Brad Majors in Rocky Horror. Favorite role that I had in a play, Benvolio in Romeo and Juliet set in Bridgerton.
What made those roles really special to you?
Benvolio was just so fun. I don't know, I felt more like myself than I think I have with any other role. It was a lot of just goofing around with my friends as opposed to, putting on a show. Brad Majors, it's just such a silly show. Like the experience to be in it is just as fun as it is to be watching it, and I think that set that whole show apart and in turn set Brad apart from the other roles I've had.
How do you think the direction that you received from both Caroline Good, who directed Romeo and Juliet at Bridgerton, and Steve Tim, who directed Rocky Horror, how did working with those directors influence the way you portrayed those characters?
I think both of them did a really good job of just kind of like letting the characters show through and giving very sort of vague, just general directions and then letting us work it out. I did appreciate, there were times when I was just like, Caroline, I have no idea what you want from me here. And she was very open and told me exactly what to do, and it worked out. If I'm being totally honest, Steve didn't always do that. He was very, you're the actor, do what you got to do. But yeah, both experiences were very good in their own way.
What is your approach to the auditioning process specifically here at DePaul?
It's a lot of just going over it, especially for musicals, because they want you to come in with your song memorized. And they always provide a song or a track that has the vocals and then a track that doesn't, so you can work with both. And so that is really just going over it constantly, making sure that song is locked in your head so that when you show up in the room, it doesn't just go away. For plays, it depends on the show and depends on the director. Like Susan Anthony always has us learn a monologue or come in with a monologue. And so I know if Susan's directing a show, I got to get ready for that. I got to look at that monologue and kind of break it down. Caroline is more so wanting to see how you interact with other actors. And so that is, honestly, I pick a time where I know people who are going to be in that time as well, because I know I work well with them. And I kind of work it out with my friend group of, hey, what day are we going? Because we all need to be in this together. Like, don't leave anybody out, sort of thing.
There's a little bit of friendly strategy involved almost.
Yeah, definitely.
What is the most challenging part of being in a production at DePaul?
I'd say the time it takes. I'm in a lot of other things, Do's or Do being one of them, Greek Life being one of them, and just knowing that you're going to have to block out 7 to 9 every day for about 3 months. I mean, it has an impact on the time you spend with other people. It has an impact on the time you have for schoolwork. So just being aware of that is probably the hardest thing because it's just a consistent thing.
How have you handled that time management in your own life?
I think fairly well. Being totally open, I have noticed my grades drop a little bit when I'm in a show just because I'm not good at doing work before 5 p.m. Like, I'd kind of turn a switch on right then. And so if I don't get it done before rehearsal, it means I have to do it afterwards, and then I'm not totally there. I'm super tired. whatever that may be, at least on the schoolwork side. On the personal side, it's worked out fairly well. All of my friends, all of my brothers, they kind of know Cole's in a show. He's going to do what he can, but he's got a lot of stuff going on. And it's really funny because of the interactions I've had with like the athletes in the house, because we'll be hanging out and I'll have to go to rehearsal and they say, again? And yeah, it's again. Because I think it kind of opened their eyes to how much time it actually takes, because it's not clearly evident, like if you don't do it for a long time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Can you talk about some of the theater classes that you've taken here at DePauw?
Yeah, just kind of going down the list. I've taken acting 1, theater production and design, voice and movement. I would consider a class I'm currently in a theater class, which is a business of the performing arts. I've also taken theater culture and design and a theater history class that I don't remember the tag after history, but it was a class about theater history. Taken almost every theater professor at DePauw. I think the only one I haven't had yet is Tim Good.
How did those classes have an impact on you as a student, as a performer?
Yeah, as a performer, acting and voice and movement, a huge impact. I mean, it just opens up your vocabulary during rehearsal, because I was taking voice and movement around the time that I was in Romeo and Juliet. And so Caroline and I and the rest of us who were in voice and movement with her and also in the cast just had her own shorthand when it came to her describing how she might see this scene or how she might see her character acting in this scene. That opened it up a lot. I took acting 1 my very first semester here, and coming from just small town, like high school theater department, it really just opened my eyes to what like actual acting is and the various different ways you can approach it, as opposed to just running a scene over and over, because that's what I did in high school. Is my memorization, my acting was just from running it over and over, and it never changed. It was always stagnant. It was always static. And then after that class, one of the biggest things I took away is you don't ever really want to do a scene the exact same way twice. And I think that just opened up my performances and my acting tremendously.
In addition to theater classes and your roles in DePauw main stage productions, you're also an active member of DePauw's Theater Honor Society, Do's or Do, which puts on Insomniac Theater, an event where people put on plays in 24 hours. Why have you participated in that event, and why have you participated in it multiple times? What attracts you to come back?
The big thing about it is it's always different. For those people who don't know, they always choose a line, a character, and a prop that has to be in every play in that specific Insomniac production, if you will. And that's just really cool. The seeing how each play is different but still has these very solid things overlapping throughout them. That, and it was always like, it was like a myth, I guess. Like you would, in high school, I remember my director talking about like these crazy people who do like a 24-hour play, and it being the most, like, as a high schooler, you're like, that is insane. Like there's no way anybody could do that. And so just having the opportunity to do it and then do it multiple times is what keeps bringing me back, because it's like childhood joy, I guess.
Do you have like a favorite DePauw theater memory that sticks out when you think back?
Near the end of Romeo and Juliet, like, I had an appendectomy. And so the first 2 days I was able to perform, and then the last 2 I couldn't because I was in the hospital. And I think just the reassurances from people, like the people just showing up to my hospital room, checking in on me, Madeline Humphreys, to call her by name, just showing up and being like, all right, how are we going to fix this? Like, here's who's playing Benvolio, teach him the lines. And I was like, okay.
So you were teaching, I believe it was Brandon Jordan who had to go on and replace you, but you were teaching Brandon Jordan like the delivery of the lines in the hospital?
Yeah, I mean, he'd already looked at it, and so he knew it pretty well. But they showed up first and foremost to check on me, and I needed something to do. And I was like, do you need any help? Like, I've devoted 2 months to this. Let me impart some knowledge, I guess. But yeah, he would be like, what happens here and how do you normally deliver this? Because I'm struggling to deliver. And I would just kind of walk him through it.
Yeah. How did you approach walking him through that? Like what sorts of, any specific advice you can remember giving him?
Not specifics, but the gist of it was I would tell him what was happening in that scene and kind of what Caroline had discussed with us about each scene and like where it's coming from, where it's leading into. And I would pretty much just tell him like what I've gotten good reactions from. Like, because like I said, I try not to do anything the same twice. And so there are sometimes I'll run the scene and it gets a good laugh, and there are sometimes it won't. And so I would just tell him, like, here's what got me a laugh. Here's what necessarily didn't. Most of my scenes were with other people. And so I would tell him, you know, Cam and Jason both tend to do this, and I normally do this in response. And so you might try that, but I can't remember any specifics, no.
Gotcha. Well, one final question for you. Theater at DePauw is going to undergo some really big changes when the creative school officially opens next fall. So as a theater participant here, what are your hopes and your fears for the creative school?
A big hope that I have is building a stronger connection between the theater department and the School of Music, specifically in, you know, things we do together, like the musical. I know there's been a fairly decent divide between not necessarily the students, because we're all friends, but the groups in as a whole. So my hope is that that is mended. A big fear is that that isn't mended and it could grow worse. And again, it's not like dangerous or anything. There's no like fighting, but it's just currently we're like oil and water, where we're just, you know, living in the same area, just not together. And I would love to see that happen, where we just intermingle more.
What would that intermingling look like for you?
At rehearsals, if there's not like people sitting in groups, or if the group's like, you know, have students from both worlds, if you will, because everything we do in life is cliquey. And so just trying to eliminate that as much as possible, or negate that as much as possible, especially in a rehearsal where we're all one cast and we're all trying to achieve this single goal together. Just kind of dialing back the clickiness and being more coagulated. Is that a word? Okay.
All right. That's all I've got. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was our theater student, Cole. I had always wondered what it's like to be on the other side of the auditioning process as a theater participant myself, which is why it was so fascinating to interview Professor Susan Anthony. She has been a professor at DePauw since 2000. I have been lucky enough to act in some of the shows she has directed here, including the Addams Family musical and A Christmas Carol. Professor Anthony also teaches courses in communication and theater, and just finished an outstanding tenure as the faculty advisor for Doozer Doo Theater Honor Society. She provides a look into the creative space of the theater faculty at DePauw. How do theater faculty at DePauw choose what shows are going to be performed? That's something I've always been curious about.
Well, we have some parameters that we need to meet in order to make these possible in terms of sets and other resources. So, for instance, we usually, for the past number of years, probably about a decade now, we've done a musical, the first show in the fall. And the reason we do it in that slot is so that the set can be built over the summer and that students can learn the parts over the summer, because the rehearsal time is so short, as you know. So the rehearsal time between the time we come back to campus and when the show opens is usually only around 4 weeks. So everybody needs to be off book when we come back. Then, because that's usually a large show, the next show in November needs to be relatively smaller so that the tech director doesn't have to deal with taking down a huge set and putting up a huge set at the same time. And so usually that show tries to have a more simple set and a smaller cast. That said, Within those parameters, we usually try to balance the season with something that is a classic or something that is contemporary, something that identifies marginalized populations, a piece that is an original piece we try to do. So we try to balance the season with a mixture of things and a mixture of opportunities for people as well. So we do 4 main stage shows in a year, and they are faculty directed. And we usually have some mix of original works, new works, old works, musical.
What's the process like for bringing an original work to the stage?
Well, Rondai just worked with Teresa Shunk, who did an original musical over winter term. They worked on it for over a year and a half, revising, trying new things. And this then was a workshop production where she, as the creator, got to listen to it to decide what changes she wanted to make after this. So the process is someone writes it, you revise it, you revise it, you revise it. Eventually you might get a staged reading where people just read with scripts. Once you've heard that, you might get a workshop production where there isn't much of a set. People don't necessarily wear costumes, but it's on its feet and people are memorized. And then from there, you might get a full-fledged production. And that's pretty much the way it works anywhere, that the person who writes it sends it out and tries to get as many hearings of it as they can so that they can hear how it sounds in people's mouths and decide if they want to revise.
One thing that I am familiar with as a student is the auditioning process where you try out for a show and see if you're right for different parts. But what is that process like for the faculty directors here at DePauw? How do you make those decisions?
Well, first of all, I had neglected to answer part of your first question. You had asked about how we decide on the plays. Here at DePauw, unlike some other places, the faculty has pretty much a pretty wide latitude as to which show they want to do, if that show fits the parameters of the slot, right? We also try to confer with other faculty members. We try to get a pulse of what the students want or what they would like to do. We try to make sure that we have a reasonable equity of roles available. All of those considerations go into a piece. So for the musical, tensions are high, and a lot of people have some very definite opinions about what it ought to be. For the musical, we usually also talk with the School of Music faculty because it is joint production between the School of Music and the theater. And we need to know they are going to be working with the students in their studios, so we need to make sure that they're on board with what choices we make. The musical isn't going to harm somebody's voice, that we have the people we need and the voices we need to do this particular musical, that we have the pit available to do this particular musical, that we can afford the rights of this particular musical. So all of those considerations go into it. Now, for our audition process, it's terrifying because you feel like you're going to throw a party and maybe nobody will come, right? So you worry about, will the students like the choice enough to come out and audition? And so after you choose a show based on what slot, time of year, how big can it be, what's the set, what can the set be, do we have the costumes for it, all of those considerations, then you hope that the students want to audition. Often you have an interest meeting where you get a sense of who might want to come. And then you have auditions and you try to make them as painless and encouraging as possible. Often you have to have callbacks. So usually the audition process would be you come in maybe with a prepared monologue, or more recently we've taken to reading from the script more so. And we put people together in pairs and we hear how they sound and how they work together. Dr. Sloan, who just joined us as our brand new tenure track faculty, tried a different method this year where he did reading parties. And people just came night after night and read the play to get familiar with it. And then they indicated if there was a particular role they wanted and they read for that at a later date, which was kind of fun. So a lot of people got a chance to read it and decide if this is something they wanted to commit to or not.
So, in addition to your role as a faculty member who directs productions, you also teach several courses here. So, how do you balance the workload when you're teaching classes and directing a show?
Well, we consider directing teaching, and I would argue that vigorously that it certainly is, because you're working with people very closely for an extended period of time. And that's where you actually get to put acting concepts into practice, right? So you usually get pretty close to the cast, and the cast usually gets close to each other, and it's an investment of time on everybody's part. That said, because it's teaching, in a semester when we are directing, we teach 2 classes instead of 3, because directing is our 3rd class. And frankly, it's usually as much or more hours than a regular class is, because we're going 3 hours a night generally for 5 nights a week for 5-6 weeks maybe. Plus, Tech Week, as you know, is a lot longer than that. So Tech Week is a lengthy and sometimes painful process. So, yeah. In addition, though, to teaching and production, you've also got committee work, and I'm director of theater, so I worry too about trying to call meetings for the faculty, and if there's something that needs to be addressed or I need to talk to people about finances or space or whatever, I might be called in to do that as well. So it's a balancing act, but I think most of us would say that we find directing to be one of the most rewarding things we do.
Why is it so rewarding?
Oh, because you get to see a process where people grow. You get to see actors suddenly become confident. You get a group of people who barely know each other who suddenly are a tight unit by the end. They get some kind of reward, appreciation from the audience, and they get to perform in front of their fellow classmates and get who then will appreciate their efforts. And so it's an exciting process when it all comes together.
Switching gears a little bit, how do theater productions at DePauw interact with technology, and how has that technology changed over the course of your career here?
Well, projections now are far more common in shows, and they can take the place of some heavy scenery, which would make scene changes a lot faster. So that's kind of interesting. They have their own set of issues. Also, wireless mics have come into being. They were certainly in being before I got here, but we now have far more access to them than we did then, which makes musicals, of course, a lot more easy on people's voices because they don't have to try to project out to the back. Sometimes on music that is particularly difficult for the human voice. Maybe more rock-oriented, for instance, that, right. And lighting, of course, has developed a lot, and we now have much more advanced soundboards and light boards, which require a certain amount of skill to design for and to run. And so we're always looking for students who are interested in learning. We have a student now who's doing an internship at IRT this semester in sound design. She had worked on Addams Family, and she had run the microphones, which is quite an endeavor when you have this many people and trying to monitor all the wireless mics and make sure that when people go off stage, they're off, and when they come on stage, they're on. And with a cast of like 22, or we had probably about, I don't remember, maybe 12 mics going at the same time. So her experience with that made her decide that this was something that she'd like to pursue. And so she was taken on at IRT, and she's been learning so much and deciding if she wants to go on to grad school in this.
What lessons do you hope that theater majors and theater students learn before they graduate from DePauw?
I'd say the discipline of committing. So committing to a show means you're on and you're there and you're willing to be there every night, as long as there's rehearsal, and that you take it upon yourself to do the job of the actor, to memorize, to analyze. And so much now seems to be improv-based, that this takes, and a lot of shorts. People can do shorts very quickly, right? They don't have to spend a month developing a play to do at the end of 4 weeks of rehearsal. Instead, things are far more instant now, and people's attention spans seem to be shorter as well. So for a student to be able to commit to the show and see the show through and grow as an actor, yeah, I'd like to see every student have a shot at doing that and learning to be part of a group, because again, if you're on a sports team, you know what that's like. If you're in band or choir, you know what that's like. But some folks never have that, working together as a group for a final product, right? And so I'd like to think that people get that out of theater as well.
And one final question for you. Do you have any hopes and fears for DePauw's new creative school that you're willing to share?
I think my only fears would be that we probably have some inevitable bumps coming. Maybe with, for instance, having enough people to staff these positions, to be able to have the production staff to do what they need to do as more collaborations come forth. So the collaborations are exciting. I would argue that theater has collaborated with lots of different people over the years, regardless of whether we were in a creative school or not. But certainly now, we look at each other and we might be able to visualize collaborations that maybe we hadn't thought about. So that's exciting. And a hope that we might do more of that, that we might work with students in film and media, and actors would work with them, and they would work with the playwriting group who's producing as well, and we might all get together and put on a film festival. I mean, something like this would be exciting, a podcast series, etc. As more and more people come forth, though, and maybe want to use the existing spaces, I'm sure we're going to have some space problems where people want the same place at the same time for performances or rehearsals, maybe some of the same equipment, maybe they need sound help, and we have a very limited number of support staff at the moment. So I could imagine that my fears lie with that, I'd say.
Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Sure, it was fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Art Time Capsule. It means the world to me that this project has been heard by actual people after working on it for so long. I hope it's inspired you to think about art on our campus and what's on the horizon. The next episode will feature film people at DePauw, specifically Kyungmin Lee and Professor Jordan Scholl.